Nearly 10 years ago, I landed a huge cinematography job interviewing the former president of Mexico. It was a big step up in my career and I was really excited, but instead of it being a landmark moment, it turned into a disaster of epic proportions. I'm going to tell you how I made sure this never happened to me again at the end of the video, but for now, you just need to know that I screwed it up because I just hadn't practiced enough. From that moment on, I knew if I didn't do something to get better fast, I was going to kill my career before it had a chance to get going. The problem was I didn't have a big network of filmmaking friends at the time who I could just call up to help me. So if I wanted to practice cinematography, I'd have to find ways to do it by myself. So after a ton of time researching, I figured out that there are proven ways that anyone can level up their cinematography all by themselves. And if you want to stand out in this increasingly crowded market, the 3 exercises we'll cover in this video are going to help you get there fast. So tell me if this sounds familiar. You're at home sucking up YouTube filmmaking content and getting super inspired to level up your skills and push hard to become a better cinematographer. You've got a camera and all the basic gear you need, but what are you supposed to do with it all on your own? Like, if you want to practice, it seems kind of hard to do it without other people. Maybe you try and think of a few people who would be free to help you out on a random Wednesday afternoon, or you're scratching your head thinking about an easy subject to film within driving distance of your house. And because you can't find either of these, you just set the camera down and make plans to do it tomorrow or next week, and then go back to passively consuming the internet. This is a cycle I know all too well, so you're not alone here. Especially when I was first getting started in this industry, I was always super keen to practice, but it wasn't always that obvious what that actually looked like. But the good news is that over the years, I've learned some really useful and powerful exercises you can do completely by yourself to keep pushing your skills to the next level. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but watching movies passively and saying, "nice shot," every so often doesn't count. But what if there was a way to get better just by watching great documentaries and movies? That would be too good to be true, right? Well, yes and no, because there is a really great way to grow as a cinematographer and filmmaker by studying other people's films, but sadly, there's nothing passive about it. I learned this exercise from another much more experienced DP about 8 years ago when I was working on a unionized drama TV show, which is obviously quite a different vibe to the docs I normally shoot, but at the time I was curious about transitioning to the narrative world, and so it was kind of like an experiment. Still, I was really out of my element, so I tended to stick very close to the DP to make sure I didn't do anything stupid or accidental. And what I started to notice was that he always carried around an iPad, which I thought at first was to control lighting levels, but after I got a closer look one day, I realized it was actually just a big library of screen grabs he was constantly referencing. As I got to know him a bit better, I eventually asked him what he was looking at, and he revealed the secret: a massive catalog of all of his favorite frames from hundreds of films he'd watched over the years, and everything had a detailed description and keywords so that he could really quickly search for like nighttime interior or sunny conversation and then get a bunch of results back for inspiration. And that's pretty cool on its own, because like, how convenient would that be every time you hit a new situation to just have a bunch of top quality references? But even though that's totally worth having on its own, the real learning, in my opinion, comes from the act of organization itself. Like, let's imagine you're watching, I don't know, Blade Runner, a film I think most people can agree looks great. The first step is to pause the movie and grab screenshots every time you see a great frame. Even that's useful because you're training your brain to pay attention, but the real benefits come afterwards when you import those images and then organize them. I personally like to do this by importing the stills into Lightroom, and then one by one I'll add keywords and sort them into categories based on what I'm looking at. This forces me to think of all the different types of shots and what function they serve in the coverage, and if you do this consistently, it's going to translate into better intuitive shooting when you're holding the camera, because you're going to be thinking back to how all the greats before you have already done it. Then I'll spend extra time on a handful of my absolute favorite frames, just sort of looking at them and trying to figure out how the shot was done. I'll try and guess the lens, or what lights were used and where they were put, what's real and what's CG, if it was natural or artificial light, what kind of lights they might have used, and so on. I might even airdrop them to my iPad and then draw on them in bright colors to try and make my best guesses about where the light sources are coming from and figure out how the DP and gaffers work together to make it happen. You've probably seen these kinds of breakdowns before, like on this channel or on channels like The Wandering DP, who does these sort of screen drawings really well. I think they're amazing exercises to watch to get better, but it's even better if you're the one trying to do the breaking down yourself. You might even be totally wrong with your guesses about how they did something, and that's fine. But the more analytical analytical you can be, the better your chances you're going to be able to replicate similar things in your own work. And if you do this consistently, you will absolutely improve your cinematography, all without ever leaving the house. Again, you're not getting these benefits just by watching and noticing all the nice shots. You need to be active here and really think about it. But it's one of my all-time favorite ways to practice. And before I forget, I'll just mention really quickly that if you're into cinematography stuff like this as much as I am, the doors are officially open for my course, Documentary Cinematography Professional Foundations. I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but it goes deep into everything that doc filmmakers need to level up their cinematography and build a long-term career. So if you're into that kind of thing, check it out because the doors are only going to be open for another week or so, and they won't open again for at least 6 months. But getting back to the main topic here, building up a great reference library is an incredibly valuable exercise, but at the same time, we all know doing something yourself is ultimately way better than just understanding it. So what can you do with all this knowledge to make it really stick? Well, for that, we're going to focus on something that I personally like to do when I'm practicing lighting. But instead of just talking about myself and what I do, here I'm going to draw some inspiration from one of my favorite filmmaking YouTube channels, Lewis Potts. If you don't know Lewis, he's a commercial and narrative DP from Australia, and his channel has all sorts of really cool breakdowns of how popular Hollywood movies get certain looks. But it's not his breakdowns exactly that I want to focus on here. It's something he's doing to constantly level up his own cinematography that you can all replicate yourselves. Now, Lewis has a bit of an advantage over some people here because he owns a ton of filmmaking gear, but you can do this even with a lot less stuff. As a cinematographer, and especially one who focuses on docs like I do, a big part of the challenge is walking into unfamiliar locations and having to make the most out of them using the gear you have on hand. I like to say that this job is really just one big exercise in creative problem solving, and the more different setups you've tried in the past, the more tools you have to solve those new problems as they come up. So what does Lewis Potts have to do with this? Well, Lewis does a great job on his channel of just trying random setups around his house to see if he can get a specific look, and he does this completely by himself. Everything from trying to fake daylight at night, to using special types of bounce fabric, to creating moody scenes in his own office with minimal gear. He just sets up different scenarios and tests what works and what doesn't. And even though this stuff all lives on YouTube as educational content, I'd say Lewis himself is probably benefiting as much or even more than the people watching. That's because every time he tries a new setup, he's learning how to do it better, and I'm almost positive that means when he gets on set and a new problem comes up, he has more and more tricks and tools he can draw on to find a solution quickly. And working within technical constraints to get amazing results fast is exactly what being a professional DP is all about. So just pick a random room or area in your own house or your yard or wherever you have access to, really, and just try to prep it for filming. If you do mostly doc content like me, where we light spaces rather than individual shots, maybe that means setting up a space to look believable but also beautiful so that you can cover it in 360 degrees. I've done this a ton of times myself. I'll just like pick a random room in my house, say the kitchen, and then using the gear I have, I'll set it up like I would if it were a real shoot. That way I know what results I can expect when it counts, and also figure out if there's gear that would be worth investing in the future to make things easier. It's super simple but extremely practical, and it doesn't require any crew. Look, if you can't light your own bedroom in a believable way, you probably won't be able to light a dingy bar or a Hollywood soundstage either, so don't sleep on this kind of practice. Check out Lewis's channel for some inspiration if you need it, and just remember that it's even easier for you because you don't need to record it for YouTube like he does. In the new update to this course, we actually shot a bunch of dedicated hands-on videos just like this so you can see how I approach lighting new spaces in real time. And we're not talking like 15-minute YouTube videos here either. These are more like 45-minute full-on demos where I'm actually doing this stuff myself and making mistakes and figuring out how to make it all work. So it's not just theory here, and I think people are really gonna like these new videos. So check out the link in the description because if you're into this stuff, I made this course for you. Now, as we move on to the third way to practice cinematography by yourself, I'm going to lean into my own personal experiences here and finally tell you more about the time I screwed up that interview with the former president of Mexico. Now, you probably know that interviews are a really important part of the documentary filmmaking process, and pretty much every doc ever uses interviews in one way or another. If you want to get to the top of this industry as a DP, you're going to need to know how to do interviews well and in as many different kinds of scenarios as possible. Whether or not you can find depth and motivate your lighting sources corners and come up with a balanced frame that looks natural and cinematic at the same time is going to make a big impact on how fast you move up the ladder. And in this story, I'm going to tell you exactly what not to do. So this was many years ago now, and I wasn't quite at the start of my cinematography career, but I thought I knew much more than I did. I'd gotten a few big name clients under my belt, and it sort of gave me the illusion that I was way better than I was, so I started to accept jobs that were, let's say, a bit beyond my abilities. Normally that approach is totally fine, but in this case I bit off a little more than I could chew, and I got exposed big time. The gig was for Vice, RIP Vice. They wanted me to set up a nice interview frame with the former president, and this is a guy who was well known not to like the media, meaning I would have to be very fast in my setups with almost no time for tweaking once he sat down. I'd recently bought a few basic lights to try and up my interview game, but I'd pretty much limited my practice to just setting them up and testing to see if they worked. Like, I set them up quickly in my living room and they all seemed good to go, so I just packed everything up and went to the shooting location. Except when I got there and I looked around his totally boring office, I realized that I'd never set up an interview in such a small space, in such a bland space, and I started to panic. My first thought was that I should look for another spot, but his secretary let us know that was not gonna happen, and to make things worse, he was ahead of schedule, so we only had 20 minutes to get everything ready. I went into overdrive and I set everything up as fast as possible, and he arrived and we just had to start rolling. Honestly, I knew right away it was a disaster. The frame looked awful. I'd picked the wrong angle and the lighting didn't feel motivated or realistic. I just kept looking around the room and then back at the monitor, knowing that I could have done better with a few slightly better choices, but I knew there was no stopping it now. It was super painful. I'd love to tell you it all worked out, but it didn't. The interview looked so bad that they just never ended up putting it in the show, and I never heard from that particular producer again. But what does this have to do with getting better alone, you might be asking? Well, everything kind of. If I had more experience setting up interviews on my own, I would have been much more likely to make the right choices in that scenario, and I didn't need any crew at all to have done that. I was so rattled by the whole failure that when I got back, I spent the next week in my apartment just repeatedly setting up interview frame after interview frame in every conceivable corner of my house. I set them up in my kitchen, in my bedroom, even in the bathroom, all with the intention of just practicing. Then I'd tear it all down, find another corner, set it all up again, and every time I got better at making good decisions fast. I probably did like 30 or 40 setups over the next 2 weeks, and by the time I got my next job that involved interviews, I felt so much better going in. This is something that every doc DP can do at home that will have major benefits on your location shooting, and I'd highly encourage you to do the same thing if you want to practice on your own. Just pick a room and using the tools you have, figure out what's the best frame you can possibly make. Use yourself as a model and keep tweaking it until you're happy, then repeat. You don't have to go crazy like I did that week, but this is such an easy and simple way to practice that has real world implications, and you can just do this an almost unlimited number of times without anyone else around. And don't shy away from trying to do this in the worst parts of your house either, like the dark corners and windowless laundry rooms that would never be your first choice, because the point here is to be prepared for the worst, like those times when you show up to a beige office with 20 minutes to set up and you just have to act. Okay, so before we wrap up here, just let me say one final important thing, because I know from working one-on-one with a lot of newer career DPs that it's really easy to say like, yeah, this is all super basic, I know it already, and then just dismiss these exercises because they were maybe hoping I would give them some sort of magical hack that would make getting better fast and easy. But getting better isn't supposed to be easy. It's about time with your camera, getting your hands on the gear and trying to make the best out of tough situations. Because knowing something and being really good at doing something are very different. And in my experience, it's the cinematographers who take action, who practice the basics and nail the fundamentals, who go far in the long term. So if that describes the career you want, give this stuff a try. It really works. There's a lot more like this in the course, so check out the link in the description to grab your spot, and I'll see you in the members group. See ya.